Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dubdeuce85. If this is your first time here, I'd like to say thank you very much for checking in, tuning in. There's a bunch of new followers today over on Twitter mentioned they wanted to check out the show. We had a great week last week. If you're new here, I talk about DFS first and foremost, a big focus on DraftKings, but we do not leave out those FanDuel players as well. PrizePicks, which is a really big one for us in multiple sports, especially for the niche. And then, of course, there's going to be some betting stuff as well. We are definitely going to be talking about all things college football. We're only 40 days away from college basketball. I will, of course, be pulling double duty. CBB is where I got my start. Most of you guys know me from that. That is a daily grind, and college sports is really my thing. So if you are new and you just happen to wander in and found it from Twitter, please make sure you follow me at Dubdeuce85 on all social media, but especially Twitter. Get those notifications on. I'm, posting not only plays, but, pertinent news. Get over to ftndaily.com/pricing. Check out the different promotions that we have going on in the different packages. If you use my code DUB, that will get you 20% off. Not only will you get access to my content, but you'll also get professional sports such as NFL, MLB, and NBA, which is coming right around the corner. Other niche stuff such as esports, LOL Worlds is coming up. Javi does that for us. We've got NHL coming up, like just all the different write-ups and content tools. We have a bunch of tools for NFL. We have projections. We have ownership. We have Discord access for the college sports. Having that Discord access really does make the sub worth it. We're frequently posting, updated news, evolving thoughts, breaking injury news, stuff like that. The reason we did so well last week on the late night slate, which is typically one of our better slates, is just because people are burned out by the end of the night. They're playing less than optimal lineups. They're just missing news. They're not really doing a good job. So when somebody ends up being out, we end up seeing 15 to 20% ownership on those guys a lot of times, and it's a big edge for us. The Husky stack last week did it. They buried Stanford, my man Michael Penix, but it was Rome Odunze. That was my guy. Rome's been my guy, and hardly anyone was really on him on that slate. And of course, he broke out 100+ yards and a touch. That's just my dude. And Wayne Talapapa, who I've come around to, he has started to get the lion's share of the carries in the backfield for the Huskies. So my man Wayne Talapapa got us the dub as well. Javi took down the 2-2-2 for a cold $5,000. I got second place in the 33, $300, not bad. So felt good to get in the midst with conference play here. Less blowouts, there'll still exist blowout games, and there'll be some random non-con games throughout the season. But really, we're getting into conference play now, where we're going to get the full 4 quarters out of our players. And you see a difference with Oklahoma last week losing, but still they played Dylan Gabriel the full 4 quarters. He threw over 300 yards. You're starting to see a big difference in here. So if you're watching the show live, thank you. Please make sure you smash that like button. And also comment, it doesn't have to be questions, but, interact with me in the chat. I will get to your comment. If you have questions about DFS related stuff, betting related stuff, prize picks, props, any of that kind of stuff, please feel free to mention that. The rest of this week, we will be having shows tomorrow night. Jake Kushak, my co-host, will join me for that one. We will be covering the Saturday main slate from DraftKings perspective. That's where we'll break down position by position, talking about our top quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, guys that we think are going to be kind of over-owned and not really good, our sneak plays, our optimal plays, what chalk we're eating, all of that good stuff. Saturday morning, I'm back at 8 a.m. PST, an hour before lock, to just kind of, talk about my evolving thoughts, any last-minute breaking injury news, getting that to you guys. And then this is where, again, you guys can ask questions, comments, concerns, give me this or that type of questions, last-minute betting information, any of that good stuff. I do have a troll that shows up every Saturday morning to ask me about NFL trades. Not really my thing, but if you want to ask it and you want to give me a view, I definitely appreciate it if you want to ask me that stuff. But lots of content coming your way. There will be a slate breakdown for tomorrow's showdown write-up form. There will be a breakdown for Friday, Saturday, and of course, Jay comes through with the afternoon slate breakdown. And in the Discord, we talk about our late night stuff coming up with a player pool and a core. On this show tonight, I am going to cover the showdown for tomorrow between BYU and Utah State, and then the 5-game slate on Friday is going to be the main focus here as well. I will go ahead and go game by game in that one because there was only 5 games. Game by game is typically how I like to do things in college basketball. There will be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It'll be game by game. But on the CFB Saturday slate, I found that going position by position is a little less strenuous for you guys and information a little bit more digestible in that format. So lots of content, lots of write-ups, the betting tracker, the PrizePicks tracker, all of that stuff will be nice and loaded up here. Now, we do need to mention before we get into this that there's already been some games canceled / rescheduled. There is a big storm, hurricane coming through the south. There are a ton of games being affected. South Carolina has moved their game to tomorrow. They're playing South Carolina State, so DraftKings didn't decide to make, or FanDuel for that matter, make a 2-game slate. That would have been nice, but South Carolina would be playing South Carolina State. Probably fine that it's not there. We may have a chance at some Sunday CFB. I know with the NFL, there's not going to be a lot of people maybe wanting to play college football. In the past, when games have been moved to Sunday, though, they have had slates. SMU versus UCF has been rescheduled to Sunday morning, which is actually a pretty damn good game from fantasy purposes or just football purposes in general. And then, of course, Florida versus the Eastern Washington Eagles. So it could be a nice little 2-game slate, and there's actually potential for that to balloon into a 3, 4, 5-game slate, depending on how this goes. I do want to read for you real quick. I have it pulled up here in my notes. What games are affected and what to really look out for, because, if it's a big storm, we have a delay. Remember a couple weeks ago, that Texas A&M game where Devin Achane was really just, it was a struggle with him, and they had like a 3-hour lightning delay, and it was just really tough to sit there and kind of deal with that. Now, if a game gets canceled or moved or whatever, then DK will not lock you into that. But if you have, a game where they play the half a quarter and all of a sudden that storm comes through and they can't play anymore and they call it, or it's just way later and everybody's, they're cramped up and can't go, you're going to end up taking a 0. They may take care of you on that, but you really want to be aware and know what you're getting yourself into with these different risk levels and which games. So let me first talk about what games that's going to be affected. And again, the games that have already been moved. Eastern Washington, Florida has been moved to Sunday. South Carolina State moved to Thursday. UCF and SMU moved to Sunday, and then also ECU is playing USF. They've decided to move that game to the University of North Texas. That doesn't affect a lot, but they're playing on a different field. Other games potentially affected here: Virginia Tech versus North Carolina, MSU versus Maryland, Wake Forest versus FSU, Citadel versus App State, Georgia Southern versus Coastal Carolina. That one's coming up. UTEP versus Charlotte, Liberty at Old Dominion, LSU at Auburn, NC State at Clemson, which I want to harp on that one for a minute, and then Virginia versus Duke. So, of course, teams in Florida, teams in South Carolina, North Carolina, a lot of Carolina teams really here affected, as you might imagine, and, of course, Florida State and Maryland. The Clemson NC State total is only 40. Now, of course, if there's some weather here, that might be tough. We're looking at a potential for that to be, really, low owned, they're thinking, but damn, that seems low. I know NC State has a good defense, but Clemson was just involved in a major shootout with Wake Forest. And Wake Forest, their defense is certainly nowhere near the level of NC State. And it's not as if NC State's a juggernaut of a defense either, but look at what Clemson's doing here, right? 41 against Georgia Tech. 35 against Furman. I know these are teams that aren't great, right? But 48 against Louisiana Tech, and then they hung 51 in overtime against Wake Forest. So they're putting on a ton of points. NC State, maybe a little bit less. They've been playing some teams that are just okay. UConn, they dropped 41 on them, 55 against Charleston Southern. Close game against East Carolina, 21-20. That would still cover the 40. And then they scored 27 against Texas Tech. Which again would still cover the 40. I don't know what this is about, the 40. Maybe I'm walking myself into a big trap. I did release my free early week betting preview, which were a couple of picks that I liked. One was San Diego State plus 6.5. The other being this Clemson NC State game where I'm taking over 40 points. 27-24, that really seems like a possibility, or it could just blow out and we could see DJ Ugalele get I don't know, 4 touchdowns. Devin Leary get 4 touchdowns, like 40 points. Unless this is going to turn into a situation where, it's storming. They're not, throwing the ball. But still, both teams have really solid running backs. Will Shipley, capable of ground and pound. He's going to be able to do some things, score some touchdowns. And then NC State, they've really developed their running game between Sumo, and he's having a good season. So I don't know, that 40 seems really way too low. So I'm hitting that. I see it's 40.5 on some books now. I still think it's got to be good up to 45, regardless of the weather situation. Best case scenario, plays down fine, we win. Worst case, they play like a quarter, and then, it turns into just a soggy field, and they're just running the football. But still, 40 is not that much to come through. The kicking game would be useless at that point, but college kickers are basically useless anyways. No offense if you're a college kicker watching this. All right, so that is where I'm at there. Let's jump in. So just be aware of those games. Let's jump into first the showdown slate here. Talking about Utah State versus BYU. Utah State's been a real tough season for them. They do come into this one as 25-point dogs to BYU. The total is 60 points, so definitely going to be a lot of scoring in this one from the BYU side. Looking at it, we've got injuries galore for BYU. Gunnar Romney still dealing with an injury. It was actually ended up being a very serious injury that's costed him, the entire season to this point. It does sound like he has a chance to play now. It was actually an abdomen slice, I guess. There was like, he got a real cut through the abdomen, which is some scary damn stuff. And he's missed the first few weeks. A laceration, I guess, of an organ, which is scary. But it does sound like he's going to be available. I don't know that they would need him here, but maybe get him a few snaps. Get him involved a bit. I certainly don't think he's a guy that I want to look at for my lineups here in the showdown. But if they do give him full run, he's only 8.8, which is relatively cheap for a player of his caliber when he's good to go, and somebody that I think is definitely worthwhile at that point. But I think I'd be fading unless I'm running multiple lineups. Obviously, your captain options here, staring Jaron Hall. He had a real nice game for us last week against Wyoming on the late night slate, completed 26 of his 32 passes, 81% is great. Look at his 4 games. He completed 71% against Oregon, only 59% against Baylor. That was a tougher one. And then 79% against USF. So really good quality looks. They're putting him in a position to complete easy passes, dinking and dunking down the field, and tell his guys like Gunnar Romney and Puka Nacua, who are deep field guys at times, especially Puka, can get the ball, throwing it deep. He has thrown over 300 yards in back-to-back games as well against Oregon and Wyoming, who are both defenses that are good, not elite. He did rush for just the 17 yards. He hasn't really got it going on the ground. 17, 19, 28, and 17. So you think of Jaron Hall as being able to be a guy to rack up some rushing yards. Hasn't quite happened yet. You throw out the USF game where it was a blowout and he only had 19. He's had 26 DK points, 27 DK points, and 34 DK points. So without really getting anything going on the ground. Obvious, option there. He's 17-4 at captain. It's going to cost you 11-6 at utility. He's your number one captain option, of course. I am looking heavily at Miles Davis. Again, not the singer in this case. It looks like Christopher Brooks is bumped here. He's really, I didn't see an injury unless I missed it, but 2 carries there. His carries have been dwindling over the last couple of weeks. He had that game against USF, 13 carries, 135. I was like, okay, he's returning to his early Cal days. Here he goes. And then he's just kind of dropped off from there. And his price point is at 16.2 in captain and 10.8 on utility is just way too high. So you go to Miles Davis and look at what his workload was in a game where it was close against Wyoming for quite a long time. 13 carries, 131 yards, did catch 4 passes for 21 yards. You do like to see that. Lopini Katoa is a big pass catcher for them, for BYU. He's usually in that role. But seeing Miles Davis kind of get that as well has been pretty nice. Now, with Katoa, with Brooks, with Davis, there's a situation where we're looking at a committee backfield here. Not great, but I think that, 1.5 is what is his captain spot. So you could really go cheap there. 1K. It's a must play in all builds. You roll him at captain, you can essentially play anyone else you want. You can easily fit Jaron Hall and Logan Bonner there, and getting the two quarterbacks is a good idea. Logan Bonner, pretty high, volume passer, 41 attempts last week against UNLV. It's actually one of his better games. 31 a couple weeks ago, and then back against UConn, where it was stunningly close, and we didn't realize that Utah State was going to be this bad. They got wrecked by Bama, of course. 29 attempts, so he's right around 22, 23 fantasy points. So you can get those two quarterbacks in there pretty easily with Miles Davis, so keep that in mind when you're making your builds. If Romney's still out, I think Chase Roberts is still going to get some love there at 3.8. He's been kind of the darling, target getter. With those guys out and banged up. You saw, 4 for 60, 8 for 122, 3 for 41. Let's pull up some BYU targets here and really see what he's been doing with Puka back as well. We didn't see, any drop off from him. So the fact that he's that cheap, it's probably going to be worth using him as well, even with, Nakua back. So he does lead the team in targets with 23. Speaking of Chase Roberts, 15 catches, 223 yards, and a touchdown. It was Keanu Hill who went completely bonkers last week. He kind of, this is what we saw before Romney kind of started like taking over, and Puka had his emergence last year, but we would see a lot of like Rex, Hill, just like these different guys taking over and having big games. And we've seen, Cody Epps in the past. So it does kind of worry me to look at Keanu Hill and say, yeah, let's go 36, but he's been pretty solid. 4 for 40 has been kind of his average at this 4.6 price point. That's definitely doable for me. If you want to go that route, we know Cosper's going to get some targets. He's had a couple of, 3 catch, 4 catch games. He's viable. And then I mentioned Cody Epps, who's been sitting right around 3 to 5 too. So really kind of spread out with Romney and Puka shelved. He's been looking at all of his receivers, keeping everyone pretty spaced out. There was a transfer in tight end. Dallin Holker was kind of shocked the program. They expected him to kind of be a big time guy for them in the future. He's gone, so that kind of puts Isaac Rex back into the mix as the top tight end for them. And then, like I said, Cosper, Epps, Hill, all those guys are viable. Puka Nakua, who has just played the 2 games, 5 targets, 4 catches for 48. He had a couple of rushes in that first game where he blew the doors off of things. But a healthy Puka just kind of makes everyone else better. His first game back after missing a couple, he caught 3 of his 4 targets for 26 yards. So expect him to get more involved. I am curious to see if people kind of, fade him because of his price being up a little bit more at 7.6, people might just pay down. But as he gets healthier and in the mix, I think we'll see guys like Cosper kind of fall by the wayside, and maybe Chase Roberts, who Hall has really kind of developed nice rapport with and chemistry with, maintains that target share from him. So I do still like Puka, especially a low owned Puka. Last year when he was low owned, God, it was so great. And then he's been popular the last part of the season, and then that first game he was pretty popular. You have Lapini Katoa out there at 9.2. It's probably too expensive for him. He's going to catch some passes. He's going to get a couple of rushes, anywhere from 5 to 10 carries, 1 to 4 targets, but 9.2 is a tough ask. That's really quite expensive. I think, expecting BYU to probably take an early, 14-point lead and just keep away the rest of the way. I could see Katoa having a decent target or amount of carries and touches in general, but man, that price point really kind of hurts my feelings quite a bit. So not so sure I want to look there. And then if you want to get different, Isaac Rex is usually a guy who catches a random 1 to 2 touchdowns at a time. He hasn't done that in a while, so maybe it's due for him. But really, Jaron Hall, Miles Davis, and Chase Roberts are probably your 3 best BYU guys. And then as long as Puka's good to go, I think that he's a low-owned, option that should be good as long as health-wise he's fine. That price point should keep people off of him. All right. On the Utah State side, mentioned Bonner, of course. His receivers really Brian Cobbs, who came through pretty well on the last slate they were on. One of those midday slates as a value piece. He did pretty well. Terrell Vaughn, Justin McGriff. I think that Cobbs at the 6.4 price point is probably your best bet as far as consistency goes. I do like the McGriff price of 5.2, but he's just kind of not really panned out too well this year. I expected him to take the undisputed WR1 job with everybody, leaving for the next level. DeAndre Tompkins, Bowling, like all these guys gone. I thought McGriff would be the guy. He is second on the team with 20 targets, 12 catches, 192, and 2 touchdowns. But Brian Cobbs leads the team with 32 targets, 18 receptions, 241 yards, and a touchdown. So I think it's him. Kyle Van Leeuwen had season-ending injury/surgery, so he's out of the mix there. Look for Nine Davis, who has 15 targets, and Terrell Vaughn, who has 19 to really, be in the mix for extra touches. And then you have Calvin Tyler at 8.2. He's going to get the majority of the carries. Way back in week 1, he had the 33. Has had some tough matchups. They've been blown out. They've lost to some lower tier teams, better teams. His carries have been there, 15 to 20, but he's just not generating a ton of yardage. His YPC has been right around 3.5, which is no bueno. We need a lot more. So I think personally I'm looking to go Bonner and Cobbs for my Utah State. Those are my 2. And then on the other side, running 4 of the BYU. Miles Davis makes it kind of, easy to play whoever you want in this instance. But Cobbs seems to be the number 1 guy over McGriff. GPP-wise, you're running some alt lineups. Go McGriff over Cobbs because that's going to be the, 30% less owned if I had to guess, something like that. Between those two, and that's going to be where you get some of your leverage. All right, that showdown. Showdowns are fun, I guess. Showdowns in WNBA are terrible, and basketball in general. I don't mind them in football, especially with the Huskies UCLA game this week. There is a showdown for that. So let's move on to the Friday slate now. There he is. I was waiting for you to show up in the chat. Yes. Sutton and Khalil for Waddle. Is that a real trade? If somebody's offering you that, I don't know why you wouldn't. Jalen Waddle's a base god. Come on now. By the way, someone asked me what my 40 was in the last show. I've been training, so I'm going to get it from 4.4 to about 4.1. That's my goal by the end of this year. All right, moving on to Friday slate. Some really damn good games. I mean, this slate is amazing. I wish it could have had some more games to space out the ownership a little bit more, rostership, if you will. But yeah, no, this is a great slate. I'm phenomenally excited for this one. Tulane versus Houston is the first game on the slate. Houston, a 2.5-point favorite, 54.5. There was some news that came out here today, earlier today, I should say, with the Houston running back situation. Brandon Campbell, it was said that he was not going to play. And now they've turned the corner, and now he is going to play. So going against Tulane there at 6'2", Campbell's going to probably get, quite a few carries. He was boxing out Henry there for the first couple games, but now recently Tayson Henry's got 15 carries and 17. So he's gotten back into the mix. He's had a big game against Kansas where he caught 5 for 107. Campbell has been on the other end of it. He's had some injuries, which caused him just the 5 carries. Henry now with a healthy Campbell probably goes down in carries, and it's more of a 60-40 proposition in Campbell's favor. I do think they like him a little bit more. Both are really solid pass catchers. I think at this point, though, on this particular slate, when you're looking at the other running back options or just the fact that the wide receivers on the slate are phenomenal, I don't know that I want to waste any time and effort on a Houston running back in my actual main lineup. I think those guys are GPP all the way. And there's going to be some aggravation there because you take one, the other one's going to score 2 touchdowns, which is the Coastal Carolina method for running backs. And we always use them because of last year with Reese White and all the or running backs that would take turns scoring touchdown with Shamari Jones there. All right, let's pull up Nathaniel Dell, of course, Tank. He had a really nice game last week. Houston getting right after a couple of fumbles there in the first part of the season. There was talk from myself included that Houston might look a little bit like last year's Cincinnati Bearcats, but that was quickly thrown away after a really tough, hard-fought win over UTSA, which I thought something's wrong here. Then they stumbled against Texas Tech. Then they stumbled against Kansas, which Kansas turned out to be a much better team. And then Rice really pushed them, but Houston did win there. And Tank had 7 catches for 134 yards and a touchdown. So they've got to get him more involved. They got to pepper him with the targets. Second game out of 4 where he has had over 100 yards, 3 of his 4 games over 20 fantasy points. 7-4 is a favorable price. The Tulane defense is, a team that I could see maybe giving them, if Rice is giving them trouble, I could see it. Tulane, they had that really big win over Kansas State where they just frustrated the hell out of them. That was one where a lot of people thought they could cover and they won outright. Amart, of course, was terrible. Deuce Vaughn was held under 100 yards, which is scary. And then no receiver had over 50, or only one receiver had over 50 yards. So Tulane's defense really stuck out there to me. And then they've played, Alcorn State, UMass, who they shut out. And then they followed up. That was due a letdown, a hangover. I hate the bet, the betting guys always say that, but it turned out to be a hangover for them as Southern Miss beat them 27-24. The running game, though, was still terrible. Frank Gore Jr., only 44 yards. Zach Wilkie ended up having to throw 2 touchdowns for almost 200 yards, that for being the Southern Miss quarterback. So that Tulane rush defense is really quite strong. So if you're thinking about the Houston running backs, again, just kind of GPP in it there for me. And then Clayton Tune at 6'2", that's a really pretty intriguing price. But Clayton Tune is early on in the season been really cheap. The DK pricing algorithm has been extremely messed up. This happened last year with CBB where the pricing was messed up for the first 2 months. And I kept saying it's going to fix because this always happens. Because the first month, generally, they're finding their footing, right? And it just never really got going. And I'm scared that that's going to be the case with CFB. After a really nice pricing last year, I got to give it to DK. They had some sharp pricing and you could really find some sneaky plays. They're just not pricing guys appropriately. Saturday, Charlie Jones already is priced at 6'4", which is $2K cheaper than he should be. It's not $3K Charlie Jones, like the mistake they made a couple weeks ago, but they're killing me here. So 6'2" for Tune is definitely viable. This Tulane defense, though, might be for real. So he's kind of in the GPP category because there are some other passers on this roster or on this slate that I just like a little bit better, actually a lot a bit better. Really, so it's Tank Dell for me. Looking at the target share here, let's pull up Houston because I have this handy dandy worksheet here. So Dell has 38% of the team's receiving yards. So obviously getting peppered, and almost 40% target share. Next closest being Matthew Golden, who I like. They also have Joseph Manjack, the USC transfer. He's been solid, 17% target share. So they do have the weapons there in the passing game to make some noise, but Tune's he's not been consistent. He hasn't really been hitting those high scores. I mean, it took him, multiple overtimes against UTSA to really pay off for us. Followed that up with a terrible game. Even though they scored 30 points, he had 13 fantasy points against Texas Tech, 25 against Kansas, still kind of mediocre, and then Rice 20. So at 6'2", he's kind of in that Sean Clifford range for me. Like, he's probably going to give you 20 fantasy points here, but we're going to need a little bit more because there's some games on this slate that are going to turn into some pure shootouts. So he's fine, but really it's Tank Dell, and then we move on. On the Tulane side, Tyjae Spears finally got going last week. It's been a really slow going season. He's been the victim of some blowouts where they haven't really needed him. The Kansas State game was a real grind. He couldn't get much going there, but they ended up winning. He did score a touchdown, which is great to see. If you look at UMass, he had 2 catches for 32 yards, which is great. He did score 3 touchdowns in that game. Nothing really doing against Kansas State, and then he followed that up last week against Southern Miss with 22 carries, which was a season high for him, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. But the big thing was the 5 catches for the 74 yards. He did have a long of 29, but he was getting some pretty nice yardage on his receptions. So Tyjae Spears there at 5'3" is an intriguing play. The Houston, Cougars, their defense, which was something that I thought was going to be scary coming into the season, has really not been. They gave up 63 yards on the ground to Frank Harris, but of course over 300 for UTSA. The Texas Tech game, which also went to overtime, Taj Brooks ran for 80 and a touch against them. They gave up almost 400 yards through the air. Kansas, of course, just ripped them on the ground. Jalen Daniels, who's been a total stud, 123 yards. Devin Neal ran for 50. Daniel Hishaw ran for 50. Savion Morrison ran for 30 on one carry. So the Houston rush defense is definitely a beatable unit. Against Rice last week, it was the receiving game. They gave up 200-yard receivers last week against Rice. TJ McMahon threw for over 300. The ground game, there wasn't a lot of volume for anyone there. So I do think Tyjae Spears is the guy that in this game, if Tulane gets even a 7-point lead, something like that, they will turn the ball to him. They will put it in his hands to try to win it and grind that game out. Really reasonable price for him. I think it's going to be a hard, sell for me to possibly consider fading at 5.3. I mean, shit, he's going to be hitting, 15 points at minimum at that price. I'm definitely all over that. Michael Pratt at 6.5. He's okay. We saw some big games from him last year. This season, he's been okay. He's had some pretty decent, completion percentage, over 60%, somewhere between 65 to 70%. And multiple touchdowns with 7 to 8 touchdowns. He's had one on the ground. He's had 3 games over 50 yards rushing. That's where it gets intriguing, where, Tune, we're not going to get those rushing yards necessarily. You will get them with Pratt. He does have 197 rushing yards and a touchdown on the year. So I do feel okay about him. I think you probably want Pratt in your GPPs, right? And then Tyjae Spears, more of that guy that I'm feeling good about for my main lineup. We've seen Cam Carroll been banged up, throughout the season. So he doesn't have, him kind of looming to take carries. Clayton is really just kind of a, water break guy. If Spears needs to get some Gatorade, then he comes in. So he really should be getting the majority of the carries, I should say. I do have that report here. Let me pull it down. I have it for running backs as well. Just kind of give myself a little. So 28% of the team rushing yards for Spears, 45% of the carries, 47 total carries. Iverson Celestine has 35 total carries. You've seen he's gotten some additional work with Carroll out, but also they used him in that Alcorn game for kind of a blowout, and then they did use him quite a bit in the running game against Kansas State. Then he went back to just having the 5 carries there. So in a close game, I don't really worry about that, even though it looks like he might be pilfering some looks. Spears is probably going to get 20-plus touches, whether that's through the ground game or through the reception. So he's our guy there. The wide receivers for Tulane, that's a little bit more of a guessing game on a week-to-week basis. I don't think that if you use Pratt, do I want to have a guy to pair him with? Probably not. GPPs, maybe you want to go that route. Dejon McDougal has the target lead with 17, Shea Wyatt 15, Lawrence Keys 11, Jaquan Jackson 10, and Deuce Watts with 8. Deuce Watts and Tyrek James, who has 6. Those guys have been around a while. You'd think they would be doing a lot better, maybe a little bit more chemistry with Pratt because they have been around so long, but it just hasn't really kind of turned out, especially for Watts, who has been kind of underwhelming, to be honest. James at 4.2 is kind of interesting. He has the touchdown equity in the red zone area. But there's not a lot here for me to personally like too much of. I think you're kind of rolling the dice a little bit too much. You do have McDougal there at 3K if you want to take that because he is the target leader. He hasn't had a ton of catchable balls on all of his targets, and he's only generating roughly about 25 yards a game. He is getting some carries as well, but I mean, at 3K, I guess you could take the shot. Do we need him with all these cheap prices on here? Probably not. All right. Talk fast, man. I talk fast. That's how I am. UTSA versus Middle Tennessee. Total of 63. This should be a very good game. I show UTSA at -4. Middle Tennessee coming off that just monstrous win, right, over Miami. I don't know if that's more of an indication of, where the Middle 10 program stands or if Miami is just kind of, falling flat. They were really getting a lot of hype coming into the season, a lot like Texas does. And, they won some games early on and looked great, but man, that Middle Tennessee game with Tyler Van Dyke getting benched, and Van Dyke was the guy that I wanted my Seahawks to draft coming into the season. I still feel that way, but man, that really was not great. Middle Tennessee, of course, with Chase Cunningham, threw for 408 yards and 3 touchdowns. Frank Peasant, who they've been leaning on quite a bit, rushed for 74 yards and a touchdown. 3 receivers over 69 yards, 2 of which Jalen Lane and DJ Chisholm, his 2 favorite targets, were over 130 plus yards. I still like UTSA. I think that with their trio of wide receivers, they're going to put up points. Looking at Middle Tennessee, 31 given up to Miami. They did get beat to James Madison to start the season 44-7. JMU's been really good, by the way. And then they held, of course, Colorado State, who's pretty putrid, to 19. So I think their defensive numbers will look a little bit more or look better than maybe what they really are, because I just don't want to back off of UTSA. Looking at the target share for Middle Tennessee here with the wide receivers, Isaiah Gathings has the target lead with 25, Yusuf Ali with 24, Jalen Lane with 14, and then Chisholm with 8. Chisholm did miss a game, played 3 against 4. Jalen Lane leads the team in yardage with 231. Touchdown leaders Elijah Metcalf and DJ Ingram. Chisholm with 2. So it's kind of spread out there. Gathings, a pretty interesting look on PrizePicks, which we'll talk about at the end here. I think he's a guy that I definitely want to have shares of if I'm looking to Middle Tennessee. Gathings just been a guy that they're really, targeting quite a bit. He's only 3.3 compared to Lane, who just had a big game at 5.3. Ollie's only 4K, Chisholm 3.8. It's going to be a little bit, like I said, spread out, but Gathings at 3.3 is the most interesting, because even if the yardage isn't there, he's going to have 4 to 5 catches. He's going to have, 5 to 8 targets. Just need him to convert on 3 of those to really pay off a near min price. So Gathings is the guy that you want to really look at here on the Blue Raiders side. Running back, Frank Peasant is only 5'1". He's going to get a ton of volume typically, especially if this game remains close. Middle Tennessee doesn't want to get into a shootout with UTSA. Their receivers are far too good. We saw that happen with Houston, even though they eked it out. And typically UTSA in shootout games, it's going to favor them. So Middle Tennessee is going to want to run the ball a lot in this one. Looking at the carry percentage here. 1 second. All right. So Peasant. No, that's not the right one. By the way, I've been not charting, but I have access now to the carry percentage target shares in front of me, so I don't have to be constantly searching for that info all in front of me here, and snaps. Going to try to turn that into some more projection stuff as well. That's not far off. I know a lot of you have been asking about that. Working towards that. 61% of the rushing yards for Peasant, 63% of the carries. So definitely their bell cow. 64 carries. The next closest, 19 for Darius Bracey. So another running back that we can get that we know is going to get touches here, and only for a price of 5.1. So definitely, don't need to dip down to these 3K speculative plays if we don't, we don't have to do that. And I think that a guy like Frank Peasant will probably see quite a bit of ownership, because UTSA's defense has been giving up points in droves. As exciting as their offense has been, they've definitely been giving up points. Both sides, this is a very stackable game. It's 41. They gave 41 to Texas, 37-35 in that overtime game against Houston. Right after that, they were in an overtime game against Army, which Army's offense isn't usually that dynamic. And then even going up against Texas Southern, who they did blow out, they gave up almost 30 to them. All right, target share. So UTSA, this is the team where you want to definitely have multiple stacks with Frank Harris. You want to have, lots of exposure to Zachary Franklin, to Corian Clark, Joshua Cephas. Every week when I drop the top performances thread on Twitter, these guys are in it. He's arguably has the best trio of receivers in the entire collegiate landscape. Zachary Franklin leads the team in targets with 49, 31 catches, 391 yards, and 4 touchdowns. To Corian Clark, who was probably my favorite, 41 targets, 29 catches, 431 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And then you have Joshua Cephas there, 38 targets, 28 catches, 404 yards, and 2 touchdowns. All of those guys are they're just massive. The tight end, Oscar Cardenas, has 10 targets, and then the rest of the receivers on this team are pretty much a non-factor. They do have Trevon Bradley, who once upon a time played for Houston. 2 targets, not a factor. There's just not enough for him. These 3 guys are going to eat. And you look at last week, I mean, amazing what these 3 are able to do together. And in a game where they had it, from start to finish, they still allowed Frank Harris to throw 31 times. He still pushed almost 400 yards, and he got his guys all involved. Clark had 9 for 217 and 3. Joshua Cephas 5 for 114 and 1, and Franklin 687 and 1. And frequently we're seeing all 3 have 75 plus yards in every single game. So you typically want to just take the cheapest of that group when possible. Touchdown variance, of course, is going to, be hit or miss, but you just know that the targets and that workload is going to go. So for me, DeCorian Clark at 6'5" is the guy that I'll probably look at the most. I like him anyways, even if price wasn't a factor, just like the way he plays and lately the way he's been coming on, and he's very consistent. Whereas Cephas, is kind of more of if he's going to get a deep ball or not, and the targets aren't always there to the level of some of these other guys, although he will have a double-digit target game from time to time. And then, of course, Franklin, who is probably, the one that everybody knows, and he's usually the most popular. When UTSA is on the slate, he definitely carries the most ownership. So pick your poison there. Definitely play one of them in every lineup and get Frank Harris into your build. Frank Harris has been awesome. Preeminent dual threat type quarterback who is only 6'8" on this slate, more than, affordable. The Texas game was a struggle. We knew that. UTSA was out without their entire starting O-line during that game, which was tough. Still was able to generate over 200 passing yards, roughly 40 rushing yards. Just couldn't get anything going offensively, end zone wise. Back to business the following week. He's had 32 plus fantasy points in 3 of 4 games throughout the Texas game there. The Houston game was probably his most impressive. 3 touchdowns, over 300 yards. He did a rush for 63 and a touch as well. No-brainer play. Running game for UTSA is just they've really transformed. They were always decent passers, but last year, Sincere McCormick, 1,000-yard rusher, just a total stud for them. They fed him the rock. They just haven't had that this year. Brendan Brady, who is adequate, isn't generating the yardage that we saw from McCormick, even though there are carries, 14, 19, 21, definitely getting them. Just hasn't been the same level. 5'9" is probably a little bit too high. I'd rather play Peasant. I'd rather play Tyjae Spears. So keep that in mind. It does help that Traylon Smith, the Arkansas transfer, has been banged up. Those carries are going to Brady at that point. The first 2 games that Traylon Smith played, his carries were around 6 and 19, while Traylon Smith was right around 12 to 13. So I'm wanting the pass game here. The passing game all day long. I think this game certainly hits the over. I want to have all the Frank Harris that I can handle with one of his receivers in my main. And then the whole run back thing from the NFL crowd, definitely understand it. Maybe you can go Peasant if you think Middle Tennessee is going to have the lead. And then down there at 3-3 is just a really solid look at Isaiah Gathings. The wide receiver spots are going to be at a premium because not only do we have those UTSA guys, but we have my Husky receivers who are very much in play here. And then on the UNLV game at the end, we've been seeing the Running Rebels offense has been pretty damn good as well for fantasy purposes. Another spot where I probably want to have one of those guys. Oh, and Tank Dell from the first game. Now you're starting to see where this could possibly develop into a 4 receiver type lineup, which I know the House of 4 running backs crew that we have assembled may not like hearing that, but this is shaping up to be a slate that 4 wide receivers is viable. And it's not as if the extra running back isn't, because against my Huskies, we do have Zach Charbonnet, but there's just a lot of different avenues to go. If ever there was a slate for you to multi-enter, it's here. All right, moving on. We have San Diego State versus Boise State. -6.5. I do like the Aztecs here. Total of 39. Aztecs, they really kind of live and strive in these, grind it out type of games. So Boise State, of course, has had some serious changes. Their offensive coordinator kicked to the dirt. Something had to change. That offense just was too putrid. Hank Bachmeier not getting it done. Just as soon as the OC gets the shit canned, Hank Bachmeier hits the portal. I thought he might hit the portal in the window, which is November, but football, they are allowing guys to transfer that are grads. So Bachmeier is gone. Taylon Green, the exciting youngster redshirt freshman, is going to get the start and play the entire game. He's only 5'3". It's a tough spot, but that's a real cheap price for a guy that's going to be able to run the ball. Oregon State back in week 1, which is a probably a better defense on paper, at least over the Aztecs. He did quite well against them. He threw 19 for 28 for 155, but he did rush 11 times for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. So the Aztecs know that he's going to be able to run. They're going to have to keep him off the field as much as possible. So I believe the Aztecs running game will see a heavy dose of that. But Green at 5'3", it's going to be real tough to get away from that, even though we have such a small sample on him. We just know he's going to be able to do some things with his legs, and that's really where it's going to count. Guys like that at those price can rack up fantasy points in a hurry. At running back, it's still George Holani, but 6'7". With these other options here, it's really tough for me to get behind that price. The Aztecs, again, not the ideal matchup. And then, having a dual threat quarterback come into the mix, that's just going to take yardage away from him. So I would have been fine using him at 6K or below, but on this particular slate, 6'7" feels a little high just because of all the other cheapies. But he is obviously their lead back. He's rushed for almost 300 yards. He's caught 11 passes for 96 yards, so he factors into the pass game as well. And then, of course, Ashton Janty, who didn't really get any carries last week, surprisingly, has typically factored in the passing game. He's had, 4 to 10 carries on average. It's a guy that may pilfer as well, depending on how this new offensive coordinator is going to run things. Don't love / like any of the receivers. In fact, they're for this slate in the context, they're overpriced. Stephon Cobb's 6'7". LaShawn Caples, who I really liked last week, is a cheaper price at 6'4". That's going to be tough for me to really get behind. I don't think that we're going to see, and it could be wrong, but I don't think Taylon Green's going to come in here and start slinging the rock around against the Aztecs. I think they'll really end up leaning on either the run game or Green will get, his on the ground and complete some smaller passes. So I can't pay almost 7K for a Boise State receiver in this particular spot, in this matchup. That's just way too tough for me to do. So probably Green or bust, right? On the San Diego side, we really just saw a phenomenal performance from Jordan Byrd. He's down there at only 3K, so that's an interesting price, obviously, for him. He had the game-winning touchdown with approximately 40 seconds last week against Toledo, 15 carries for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's not a bell cow back by any means. They have Keenan Christon there, Chance Bell, who's been extremely banged up. Doesn't even sound like I don't think he's going to end up playing. We'll see. They have Cam Davis, Armstead. There's just a lot of different backs that factor in. So even at 3K, you have to kind of pump the brakes and realize that you're going to have a timeshare here. But as far as value goes, you can definitely look to him. I think I prefer Gatings at 3.3 as a value receiver instead, and kind of pay more of a premium at running back for some guys that we know is going to get the actual volume. But 3K is 3K at the end of the day, right? Looking at the carry distribution, Jordan Byrd does lead the team with 26% of the carries. Cam Davis at 21%, Keenan Christian 18%, Jalen Armstead at 17%. So you can see there's a lot going on here that isn't really that exciting for fantasy purposes. Quarterback is even less exciting with Braxton Burmeister. He's been fairly ordinary, maybe even below ordinary. He's completing less than 60% of his passes. He's had one game over 20 fantasy points, and that was against mighty Idaho State. Arizona was a tough game. Utah, a tough game. Toledo, he just really leaned on the run game. So he's only 4.8, which you don't typically see quarterbacks that cheap. But we have just for a few hundred more Green, or we can go up and get Harris and my man Michael Penix. At the receiver spot for San Diego State, they're all cheap. which makes them at least interesting. Matthews 4-5, Shavers 3-9, but with Burmeister struggling to throw the ball so much, it's just really tough. I think you're really looking at one of the running backs here for San Diego State, and it's just a GPP situation, or you're just playing Taylor Green naked and you're moving on. Betting opportunity here, though, I think that San Diego State plus 6.5. They might not win, but I very much believe that they'll be covering that. All right. Moving on, we have Washington versus UCLA. Right now, my dogs are minus 2.5. That opened around 3.5. I was a little surprised to see them, be road favorites against UCLA. UCLA has been a good team. Some may argue my Huskies haven't played anyone just yet. Stanford without Emmitt Smith's kid who's injured for the year, unfortunately. But a really good win for them there. A really good win against Michigan State, which I still feel is a solid win, even though Michigan State's kind of fallen on their face here the last couple of weeks. So I think there's a betting opportunity for UCLA, but obviously being a Husky fan, I'm a major homer, and I like to think that they win, but this is the first real test for them. We do have a total of 64.5, which is the highest 1.5 over that UTSA game, and you want to definitely have multiple shares of both sides. Starting with my Huskies, because that is what I know. We had, a major edge. Like Rome Odunze was like 19% at most, right? 19 and 22%, which was great. And these receivers are definitely going to take turns to a degree. But Rome's going to be that guy. Jalen McMillan's going to be that guy. You're going to see them consistently get targeted. They may not have these 100-yard games of multiple touchdowns every week, but the targets are going to be there. Meanwhile, Giles Jackson and Julian Polk will have those kind of spike weeks like Polk had 2 weeks ago and then kind of disappear the week after. More your GPP guys, McMillan, Rome, your main guys. Penix at 8.5, expensive. You don't have to go there if you don't want to, especially considering we don't know what to expect from UCLA in this particular game. He's just been awesome. This offense under DeBoer, this team in general, I'm really excited about the direction of the program this year. And keep in mind, we lost to Montana last year with Jimmy Lake, and it's just been a complete turnaround there. Now, UCLA's played the likes of Alabama State, Bowling Green, Colorado. These are bottom feeder teams. They did play a solid Sun Belt level quality team in South Alabama, and that did go to the very end there. Bruins scored 9 unanswered in the fourth to end up winning that game 32-31. And that gives me hope, because South Alabama the Sun Belt in general is a really good conference this year, by the way. But LaDamian Webb, he rushed for 124 yards against UCLA, so the Huskies can definitely replicate that. There were 4 different receivers for South Bama that had 42 plus yardage and 4+ receptions. Bradley was at 237, but very efficient. He completed 28 of 36. That's their quarterback. So I definitely have hope here, and I think that Penix won't fold in the moment. Tough kid, played in the Big Ten. When he's healthy, he's much better than people realize, and he's really being able to show that this season so far. 8.5 may keep people off of him, which I like. He's thrown 300+ yards in every single game, averaging almost 30 DK points. He's had the 235 spot games. Stanford a little less, just the 23, but he didn't have to do a lot after that game was in hand. And Talapapa was cooking on the ground. But Penix still, like I said, threw for over 300 yards. He just had the 2 touchdowns. So I like him at 8.5. I don't know that he's going to be a priority for me. I am going to certainly have Huskies exposure in my main, but right now I'm looking to Frank Harris definitely, and then that second super flex spot as quarterback. Brumfield's there, DTR's there. There's a couple different options for me. Cunningham, if you want to straight stack the Middle Tennessee game, which I think is viable, or going a fourth running back potentially if you want to go there. So I think Penix is an intriguing GPP play, but they've priced him appropriately. At running back, the Huskies are known. They have one of the most, coming into the regular season, clogged, committee backfields. That was just really tough to, want to use for DFS or fantasy purposes. Things are starting to separate, which is nice. Wayne Talapapa, the Virginia transfer, has begun to really get majority of the carries, at least in terms of the last game and a half. They've had some young recruits that they got in at running back transfer out because they legit had 7 running backs coming into the season that could have gotten burned. But looking at that Stanford game, 13 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. Will Nixon had 4 for 21. A bunch of receivers had carries. Richard Newton, who's been in the program a long time, kind of a short yardage guy, he had 5 carries. It was very, very spread out. And we didn't even see Cam Davis had been really the 1B to Wayne Talapapa's 1A. So we'll have to see what's going on with that. But Davis had 17 carries the week before that against Michigan State, while Talapapa had 12. So they were kind of splitting the first couple of games of the slate. You look back to the Portland State game, Talapapa 12, Cam Davis 10. Richard Newton had 10 as well to the blowout. And then the Kent State game, which was their really coming out party there, Talapapa 11, Nixon 9, Cam Davis 8. So really the only running back we can trust for DFS purposes is Wayne Talapapa, but they have priced him appropriately at this point to 6'4". But Cam Davis 4'9", Newton 3K, like GPP guys, especially Davis, potentially to see what's going on there with his snaps or if there's an injury. But Wayne Talapapa is the guy that I think we can trust at this point to get the majority of the carries. It's the receivers, though, that I want. Rome Odunze is still too cheap at only 5'4". We're not going to get him at a lower ownership like we have, the last couple of slates the Huskies have been on. Was injured for week 2, but they really didn't need him. And then when he came back for week 3, Michigan State paid so much attention to him that allowed Julian Polk to really go off. Jalen McMillan, 7'1", he's kind of appropriate there in terms of pricing, but Rome Odunze at 5'4" is absolutely the number 1 play there on the Huskies, and I was very confident about it last week. It panned out for us. I'm very confident about it this week. The only thing is we're going to have company, right? There's going to be plenty of ownership there. Looking at the targets here, Jalen McMillan leads the team with 31, 21 catches, almost 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. Now, second on the team in targets with 26 is our guy, Rome Odunze, but in one less game, only 3, 18 catches, 293 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is a star. He will be playing on Sundays in a couple of seasons, mark my word. Julian Polk, third on the team with 21 targets, 13, 256, and 4. He, of course, had that mammoth 3-touchdown game against Sparty. Giles Jackson, 15 targets for Jackson, 13 catches for 175 and 1. Arguably the fastest kid in all of Pac-12. He's very fast. Tight end Devin Culp, 10 targets, 5 catches for 43 yards. Taj Davis, can never forget about him. He is a guy that is capable of having a 100-plus multiple touchdown game. Very fast as well. 8 targets, 4 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. Their other tight end, Jack Westover, had a nice game last time out. 8 targets, 6 catches for 91 yards. And then you have a bunch of 2, 3, 4, 5 targets. They pass to the running backs okay. Talapapa has 7 targets, but mainly they're going to be looking to their fast receivers. And all of these guys are very, very quick. But Rome Odunze is my guy. When we got him in the recruiting class a couple of seasons ago, I was really excited about him and McMillan. And those two are finally with a great throwing quarterback with a great arm, I should say, are doing some nasty things. So Rome is definitely going in the lineup there at 5'4". That's way too cheap. Expect company. Will Nixon is an interesting GPP play at 4'9" because they will give him carries, but really go Rome and then move on from there. GPP stacks Penix, McMillan, and Rome together. That trio can definitely do some damage. Now on the UCLA side, DTR Thompson Robinson at 8'1", certainly worth a look. I think the Huskies defensively, they've got some guys on it that are going to play on Sundays as well, but they're beatable right now. They've had a lot of injuries over the last couple of seasons. They've had guys who have been slow going, and they've had some inexperienced guys playing in that secondary at times. So I do think that we can look at targeting against them throughout the season. Peyton Thorne late in the game there for Sparty. He ended up throwing 323 and 3. The secondary was just tired as hell, though. A lot of that came in the fourth quarter. Against Kent State, they didn't, gave up only 200 to Colin Schlee, but a touchdown there, got a couple picks. And then on Stanford side, Tanner McKee almost threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns last week. So capable quarterbacks have been doing quite well, even though that game was never, in doubt. And if the Huskies can build a little bit of a lead here against the Bruins, then DTR will have to gun and throw. And even if he doesn't, his dual threat side will be enough to make him a viable option, because I do think the running game or running defense for the Huskies is a little bit suspect here. And I think running backs are going to be probably the primary option to target against the Huskies, at least for the next couple of games. DTR, like I said, has that rushing ability. He's rushed for almost 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's thrown for 900 yards and 8 touchdowns to only 1 interception. That only 1 interception there is a nice mark to see for DTR. He's been in the program forever. He's had some ups and downs. If he stays healthy, certainly one of the best backs or best quarterbacks in the Pac-12. Now, Zach Charbonnet, that's our guy, Sharbs, as I like to call him. Only 6'5". He is definitely in my main player pool at running back. Only 9 carries. So Colorado is going to be like 2021 Missouri level bad. Missouri gave up 250 yards on the ground per game last year. It was always, you could sometimes target 2 running backs against them. I think that's what Colorado's going to be this year. Only 9 carries for him against them, 104 yards, 3 touchdowns. We were looking for that the week before against South Alabama. He had 13 carries for 78 yards. Close game, but they ended up having to throw a lot. So he didn't really pan out for us, even though it wasn't a horrible game. He had 15 fantasy points. He did catch 3 passes for 51 yards, which is something he can do. And then, looking back at the Bowling Green game, 111 yards, 5 catches for 36 yards. So he had a touchdown. Just a really productive guy. And at home against the Huskies, they're going to have to give him the ball a lot. So 6'5", makes way too much sense. He should be priced around $8K on this slate, and they dropped the ball there. And really, nobody is priced appropriately in this particular slate. But Sharbs, Peasant, Spears, those 3 running backs look really good. Aiden Robbins, who should be priced higher, he's only 6'8". He looks really good. I think Talapapa is playable. Like, the 4 running back build is certainly in play for GBP, but man, there's a lot of firepower on this particular slate. Sharbs on the season, he didn't really have to play against Alabama State. There was some injury talk there. So he lost a game because he only had the 1 carry for 3 yards, but he has rushed for 293 yards, 4 touchdowns, 8 catches, 87 yards. So very active in the 3.5 games that he's played. At wide receiver for UCLA, let's pull up the target report, because last week the Bruins had some okay performances, but their wide receivers have generally been pretty inconsistent. And it does seem DTR has identified a favorite target, which is Kazmir Allen. Kaz has 25 targets on the season, which leads the team 20 catches for 152 yards and a touchdown. Duke transfer Jake Bobo's been coming on, though, yardage wise. He's caught 15 of his 16 targets for 221 and a touch. Titus Makoyo Atamaya I practiced that one. 12 targets, 7 catches for 85 yards. And then Hudson Habermel, their tight end, 7 catches on 11 targets for 77 yards and a touch. Like I said, they're really spread out. Kaz is really like the guy for DTR. He looks to him a lot. Bobo is probably not in play for me because he's priced at 7.3. I'd rather just pay for Tank Dell. But Kaz at 6K is at least interesting. He is a guy that they want to get the ball to in a myriad of ways. He has been kind of spread out all over the field, looking at the directions of his passes. They really truly are everywhere, short, long, to the left side of the field. PFF has a pretty cool tool for that. But since the game against Bowling Green, the passing has gone down, but they've had some blowouts, which has suffered. Now, in a close game like this, I think we could see him, show some more viability. But 6K is more of a GPP price for me and not a main team price, because I would much rather play Rome or any of the UTSA receivers. All right, that will take us to the last game. And then we're going to delve into PrizePicks, because there's a lot of soft PrizePicks numbers this week. We're going to get right on PrizePicks. We had a really good pace last week for the Tulsa guys. Davis Brin, who had a prop of 270 passing yards, and Keelan Stokes, who had a prop of 75.5 receiving yards. Both in that first half were well on their way. I think Brin was over a 180. Keelan Stokes was at 50, and both got serious injuries. Keelan Stokes was he got hit so hard, he was doing the wobble leg thing, and Davis Brin suffered such a serious injury, he had to be carted off. So bad luck there, but we'll bounce back. New Mexico versus UNLV. That finishes the slate. New Mexico, 14.5-point dogs. The total is only 43.5. I think the ineptitude of New Mexico there is the main reason, because the UNLV offense has been actually pretty fun. It starts with Doug Brumfield at quarterback, who they have priced probably appropriately at $7K. Last week against Utah State, we took a shot on him. He had two rushing touchdowns, threw for 217 and a touch. There was some rushing scores there that really pushed him over the top and got him to 25 fantasy points. But he's had a game over 34, a game over 40. This UNLV offense has just been way better than people would expect. And Aiden Robbins has, their running back, been a big reason for that. But Brumfield comes into it. He had a 100-yard rushing game against UNT, which was phenomenal. He has over 120 yards on the ground this year, 4 touchdowns. Almost 1,000 passing yards in 4 games, 8 touchdowns to only 1 interception. Like, that is exciting to see for Dougie Brumfield, because he's had some really tough games in this program, and has had some up and down performances over the last couple of years. And just a couple games, his first real year of taking the throne. But man, he is really branching out and has hit his stride. So I like Dougie Brumfield for GPP. I actually wouldn't mind him as my QB2 next to Frank Harris. I think, that rushing upside and touchdown equity for him in both the air and on the ground is making him a worthy look for me. Aiden Robbins had been habitually underpriced every time they were on the slate, 3.3, 4.7. Now they've got him up to 6.8, which is better. Going up against New Mexico, I think he's still probably the best overall UNLV play. He's got over 420 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns. He keeps getting these receptions for negative yards. So you'll see he has 7 catches, but the yardage just isn't there for him. So he will get you some PPR points, but you're going to have to rely on the touchdown scoring and the on-the-ground yards, which his touchdown equity is very safe. He has a touchdown of at least 1 in every single game. We know UNLV running backs the past couple of seasons. Our guy Chuck Williams last year, very consistent touchdown score, and then Robbins is just that next guy in line. So another running back where if you're looking at the quarterbacks, you don't want to pay up for Penix, you're not really feeling the 7K Brumfield, Robbins could very easily slide into your super flex next to the other running backs such as Peasant, Spears, and Sharps, and you'd have a pretty damn strong lineup. Now, looking at the target share for UNLV, we have concentrated targets amongst 3 guys, and then after that, it's pretty spread out. And Ricky White had a very disappointing game last week where he just disappeared in full. And a lot of looking back at that and seeing some game footage just to see if he was being doubled at all, there was additional defensive attention being placed on him. So that made me feel a little better about that. But leads the team in targets with Kyle Williams at 26. Ricky, of course, a Big Ten transfer, 19 catches, 317 yards, 3 touchdowns. Kyle Williams has been on the team for a couple of years now. 18 catches, 235 yards, 4 touchdowns. And Jeff Weimer, who I think is going to turn out to be a pretty consistent, solid fantasy option over the next few seasons. 16 catches on 21 targets for 180 yards. Hasn't broke the plane yet, but that will come. And then you see tight end there, Shelton Zion with 9 targets. Nick Williams, their WR4, 8 catches on 10 targets for 126. And then everybody else between 2 and 3. So a really concentrated target share between White, Williams, and Weimer, the 3 Ws. And I think that GPP wise, you want to get a look at some of these guys. UNLV offense is really better than people realize. I think, the ownership for that last week's middle slate, the afternoon slate, was not necessarily a shock for me, but it really showed you where people are at with them in terms of believing and just looking at them as a team that, isn't going to be able to move the ball, or they're just going to run it. And that's just not the case. Because you look at Brumfield and Robinson, people are going to just ignore their receivers. But, passing yardage, they're averaging over 260 yards per game. Through the air, they're averaging over 180 on the ground. So that's where you can see that. But I just really like Weimer. I really like White, and I think that GPP, any of those guys could potentially win it here against New Mexico, which is a offense that I'm not so sure can keep up. Now, you're not getting any real big discounts here. You know, Ricky White 6'3", Kyle Williams 6'2". Makes it kind of tough to get down with them. I think that Weimer at 4-5 is your most playable. And he is a guy that I could very well see being in my main. And people that are going to look at box scores are going to see that his numbers aren't as sexy as the other two. But like I said, he's fully capable of being the high scorer. He is a PPR option, which we want on DK. A 5 for 50 stat line for him at that 4-5 price is certainly going to pay off. So Robbins and Brumfield first. You can run Brumfield naked if you want, and then you can go from there with the wide receivers. Don't be afraid to have a running Rebel stack, though, because they're going to control this game. Looking at New Mexico, it's tough. I don't have a lot of excitement for this football team. First, when I looked at it, I thought the 14 was a little high just because it's UNLV, and but New Mexico is just offensively challenged. They played Maine, they've played UTEP, which they actually won. They got shut out against LSU, to be expected. Boise State, they gave up 31 to. So there's a lot of excitement here for me. They do run Miles Kendrick at quarterback. Not a lot to be excited there at 5K. He's probably like 1K too much. He struggled mightily. The game against Maine was his best game, and he had 16 against them. So don't have to really worry about him. At running back, Sherrod White at 4.8 typically is the guy that's going to get the looks. Nathaniel Jones has been splitting with him, although they did give Jones over 20 carries against UTEP. He's only 3.7. Don't think they'll be in a position where they're going to be having to run the ball, though. They're going to have to try to throw it with Kendrick, which could be very, very tough. Their top two receivers on the team, Jordan Porter, who's there at 5'6", and then Luke Wysong at 6'1". Those are the guys that if you, for whatever reason, want to look to a New Mexico, GPP exposure, those are the guys that are going to be the ones to score. Wysong leads the team in targets with 13 catches for 108 yards, 1 touchdown. And then Jordan Porter, 16 targets, 10 catches for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not a very exciting squad. So this slate's really, really nice, but there's some dead weight on here. We really want to look to, running backs from Tulane, everybody from Middle Tennessee and UTSA, everybody from UCLA and Washington, and then, UNLV. Core-wise for me, Frank Harris at quarterback, I think just real obvious play. At running back, it's going to be Sharps. I think Zach Charbonnet's gonna give my Huskies trouble. We saw Filkins, who filled in, for EJ Smith last week. Casey Filkins run for 100 yards. That's one of those things where if EJ Smith played, he probably would have rushed for 150 yards. And I think that Sharps is just going to be a really tough guy for us to try to figure out. So I do have concerns there as a fan standpoint, but I'm riding with him. And then at wide receiver core, it's going to be cheating a little bit, but the UTSA guys, take your favorite one. For me, it's DeCorian Clark, and it's not even just that he's the cheapest of the three. It's just I like the fact that he's consistently getting those kind of intermediate route targets, which is giving him those lock and load PPR targets, and he has less kind of up and down, production or variance between this production and than what we'd see with some of the other guys, and I don't know. I think Clark's gonna have a big game. I want to play 2 of these guys probably because it's just gonna be such a fun game. But on the other side, Middle Tennessee, Isaiah Gathings as a run back is kind of like a value WR core type of play where maybe he's not going to get enough look there, but at 3.3, I think he's your primary play. So a lot to like. Let's talk about PrizePicks. They have an updated board here. Barring injuries, I think we have an opportunity to do some serious damage here on the PrizePicks machine. So let's see. They have DTR at 229.5 passing yards. This is a game where like I said, I like sharps. I'm on him, but I think that, ultimately DTR is going to have to sling it to keep up with Phoenix, right? Puts him somewhere between 250 and 260, I think, typically in this environment. So that feels pretty low to me. I think that that Chase Cunningham number at 228.5 passing yards is too low. He's going to have to throw the ball. They're going to have to keep up with the shootout, this offense that is UTSA. So 228.5 passing yards, that's too low. Looking at both of those with supreme confidence. Rushing yards, if we believe Tyjae Spears is back / kind of shaking off the early season trouble, they have him at 56.5 rush yards. I think he gets there just because the volume will be there. Like I said, I'm pretty confident he gets 20 touches, whether that's through receptions or on the ground remains to be seen, but 56.5 for the unquestioned RB1, as long as Houston doesn't jump out and build a 14+ lead. Spears is going to get plenty of work. So that feels low to me. Frank Harris is low at 37.5 rush yards. He's going to be all over the place, passing 350 yards, rushing 50+ yards. So give me the Frank Harris special there. He's just too damn good. And then the category of receptions has been pretty good to us. Jake definitely there too. Isaiah Gathings, I think, is interesting. I keep on kind of harping on him. Over 4.5 receptions. I just feel like he's going to get a lot of those kind of cheap, like 3-4 yard receptions, and they're gonna stack up. So over 4.5 receptions for him. They did not give us a Rome Odunze reception number. They gave us Jalen McMillan instead. He's okay at 5. Keep an eye out if they give us Rome. They just don't want to lose money, I guess. But Brian Cobbs for Utah State for the showdown game is at 4 receptions. I like his over 4 receptions there. Target leader for Utah State. They're going to have to throw the ball. BYU is going to obviously be leading, and Cobbs should certainly see 6-7 receptions in this one. Now, I do have a bunch more for the Saturday games, but we'll save those for tomorrow night's show with Jake so that we can highlight any deficient numbers. Now, I will load the tracker tonight. I've actually already begun doing so. So for those of you who are subbed to the site, you'll see those numbers early. I did mention we wanted to start doing that by Tuesday, Wednesday night, because there are frequently changes, obviously, by Saturday where those numbers are sometimes 5 to 15 yards different in the wrong direction. So we're definitely going to continue to do that between Jake and I and some of the other CFB PrizePicks guys. There'll be a PrizePicks show for CFB on Friday with Govier and Stewart. So keep an eye out for that. One other PrizePicks to look at, Zach Charbonnet, over 98.5 rushing plus receiving yards. He's going to hit 100 one way or another, whether that's on the ground, but give him a little bit of receptions there as well, 5 for 30, over 98.5. So that's where we're going on PrizePicks. Kind of mentioned the betting stuff. Plus 6.5 for San Diego State, if you can still get it. That is definitely my favorite of the Friday games. I did mention Clemson versus NC State over 40. That's for the weekend games, though. And there's going to be plenty of opportunities there. Frank Branks in the Discord putting his stuff out there. He's been really good as usual. One other bet that I'm really looking at for this weekend too is the Kansas Jayhawks +3 and their money line against Iowa State. I am truly a believer in what the Jayhawks are doing. Took me a while to get there. Last week I was pretty confident in them. Had some Jalen Daniels, and at this point I think that he's just matchup proof and probably going to win this game outright. So I'll end up betting the money line and +3, but those are what I'm looking at for right now. All right, so recapping the rest of this, there's quite a bit of you out there. If you guys have any other questions before I head out, please feel free to shoot those out there. But just to recap the content schedule, write-ups for tomorrow, Thursday showdown, Friday, the Friday slate, Saturday, main slate, also the afternoon slate, Discord for the late night slate, and then shows again tomorrow night, 8:30 p.m. PST, 11:30 EST for those of you on the East Coast. So a half an hour earlier between Jake and I, we will be doing the position by position format. And then Saturday morning, the Q&A session. I will be there with any last minute injury news, evolving thoughts, because of course from Thursday to Saturday morning, stuff changes. My core may look a little different. Injury news happens. So just make sure that you're in that Discord, checking in with us throughout the day. I truly believe the information going on there, not just for myself or Jake, but also the subs, posting tweets, message boards. We've gotten to a point where a lot of us are checking message boards now and going the extra mile. And again, just a real cheap plug for CBB. We're only 40 days away from having a daily college basketball grind in addition to the college football stuff. So I'm excited. I can't wait. This is my favorite time of year. Leading into these two sports going on at the same time and into March Madness. So that'll do it. There is a bunch of NFL stuff in the chat there. I would love to pass that information along to our NFL guys for you, and I will do just that. Thanks a lot, guys. Everyone who joined in live, welcome. And please, I would encourage you to join us again tomorrow night to check out the Saturday main slate. Let's continue to kick ass. Let's continue to make some money, and really just I'm gonna do the promotion again. If anyone that watched the show or is in our Discord binks a GPP, no matter, it has to be 100 plus people, I will give you some FTN merch. So thanks, guys. Deuces.